All right, let's get this thing rolling. Hello, guys. As usual, thank you very much for joining in, running through an intro so that people later watching these videos on YouTube, they know what this thing is all about. As always, we are recording, so since we encourage people to be sharing their thoughts and stuff, just make sure that you don't share anything that could, get you into any kind of trouble. Getting those things out of the way. What is the virtual brown bag thing all about? Is a place where we get together, we share tips and tricks, experiences, frustrations, or difficulties. It doesn't matter, however little you think something is, just share it because the little thing for you may be really a big thing for somebody else. We do this every Thursday from 12 to 1 Central Time here on Skype. Anybody and everybody, willing to either share or learn or doing both, more than welcome to join in. So if you also know of other people who should be on this call, by all means, please invite them. We have shared a whole bunch of stuff from different programming languages to different frameworks, libraries, processes, little tools, articles, books that we've read. We've been really literally all over the place. It's, you know, always an open-ended thing where whatever it is that you've been passionate about, just bring it up. This is a perfect place for that. We have the virtualbrownbag.com website where you can find links to our Slack channel, our Twitter um, channel, and also the links to the previous videos from all the previous meetings. So make sure to check it out. And you can always also find the link to this Skype meeting up at the top of the website. And well, other than that, let's just get rolling. And so, right before, and I'm sorry, hey George, how's it going, man?
That's fine. You can keep going.
All
Yeah.
right, cool. Yeah, I just wanted to, I mean, right before we started recording, Tony and I were just chatting, right? And he was essentially sharing something that has been happening recently, and I really always try to make a point um, about the things that we share. Sometimes we don't feel like oh, this thing that I have here that I've been doing, I don't think it's worth sharing because you know uh, we are all or most of us are very good at just putting down the little things that we know that we feel like, oh, this thing here is just so small, this is old news for everybody else. Well, it is not, right? Even if you've taken like the first step towards something, there's a lot of people who are thinking about taking that first step and they never do for whatever reason. And then when they hear of somebody else saying, oh yeah, I just I've been thinking about doing it and I finally took the first step, it seems like that's what people need to just lean in. And I've had this realization, like, it was maybe 16 years ago. I was at this conference, and at that time, XML had been around for a while, right? So it's like, well, everybody knows what XML is, and what an element is, what an attribute is. And I'm at this conference, and there's this one talk that I see on the list of talks, Intro to XML. I'm like, Intro to XML? It caught me thinking. But then talking to the speaker, who's a friend of mine, he said, dude, he gave me this advice. The things that we take for granted, we end up overlooking a whole lot of people who may not have heard of the thing or who may not have gotten their feet wet on that thing. And yeah, as it turns out, he had like a full room with people wanting to learn an intro to XML. So from that day on, I'm like, I don't care how many times I've given talks on the solid principle, on the basics of object-oriented programming, on design patterns, on C sharp, whatever. There's always something that people can use that to either learn it or just get inspired to learn that thing that is like an intro to whatever, and then passing that along to somebody else. there's a lot of value in that. So, Tony, not to put you on the spot, but already doing, you just said you were like going back to learning some React. If you don't mind, like sharing with us, what kind of resources have you been learning? What has made you look into React as opposed to anything else? Like, what is the tipping point for you? Those would be, I think, very valuable to know. If you don't mind sharing that.
Okay. Specifically about React, I worked on it a few years ago, and Angular's kind of in the same boat as this. And I never really learned those technologies right the first time, so I never kind of picked up the way you need to think through your applications and things like that. So I decided that now that I have some free time, I was going to, go back through and try and learn some of the stuff the right way from the ground up. And that way, if another position comes up, that's using Angular or React or whatever, then I have a better starting point than just kind of getting thrown into it sideways.
I like it.
Yeah. So, but I basically have a list of stuff to do, right? So some of it's getting some of these Azure certifications, learning new technologies. I don't have my list in front of me, but yeah, it's just a stack of stuff to do, to keep busy, to improve my skills, to make myself more marketable in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. From the stuff that, so you said you've done Angular before as well?
Yes.
Okay. So how are you feeling like this thing between React and Angular? Do you currently have an idea as to when would you use one versus the other? Like, are there any specific use cases that you've come across? It's like, oh yeah, this is definitely better for React. This is better for Angular. Why so?
I think if you're building an application from scratch, you could probably pick either one.
Okay. Would you say any kind of application, or have you spotted like for different types of applications there could be, a better,
for like a single page application, right? You could do it in either technology. It just depends on how much weight you want your framework or library to take up. Angular is a framework. React is a library.
Right.
So I would tell you, if I had to add a feature onto an existing website that is not written in React, then I would probably look at using React, because that seems to be able to kind of snap in better, whereas Angular just kind of takes over the world.
Right. That's something that I've been putting a lot of thought into, where this experience that I've had with React, it seems to me that for pages where the users will come in, right? They may come from like a Google search or whatever, land on this page. Maybe, there's a list of products, or there's some like product information. They say, yeah, this is the thing that I want. I want 3 of these, 4 of those, now I want to purchase it, and then I'm going to get out, and I may not ever go back to that page. So this is one type of application. And then there are the kinds of applications like ERP type of systems, like line of business applications, where the users will log in the morning. They will spend all day on that application and then get out. It seems to me that for the first type of application, React is a very good match, because it's lightweight. It's just a library, very minimal things that you need to bring in. Whereas on the ERP line of business, it seems like Angular fits the bill better, just because of everything it already brings with it. But again, at the end of the day, if you have like a kick-ass React developer who knows everything that it has and what it doesn't have and what needs to be brought on, then of course, 6 on one hand, half a dozen on the other. So, George, what are your thoughts? I'm pretty sure you have some deep thinking about that as well.
So here's oh, I'm getting okay, cool, got it. Here's the thing. I don't know that that's kind of fair to say. For one thing, so Angular, it does bring in the kitchen sink, whereas React you have to pull it in. But with Angular, you still have to know the feature to use in order to achieve the thing.
True.
Already that you don't have to npm install at some point is like 0.01% of the issue. So like Angular has, you're building an Angular application, you need to pull in some dependencies. Do you do it via constructor injection, via import, via something else? You still have to know that and know everything and decide that. And I would argue the fact that there are so many different options for it is a problem. I'm far from an expert in Angular. I've looked at it and actually, that one of the issues I had with Angular, I've used AngularJS quite a bit, and even moving to Angular, one of the issues I had with them was like they just introduced a raft of their own terminology without like seemingly any eye to what was already out there. And this is like a conversation I had on their GitHub issues like Ward Bell, where I point out that like in their documentation they like were using the word module a lot, just like talking. Well, JavaScript modules are a concept, they're a first order concept in JavaScript. It took like a lot of reading to figure out that the modules they were talking about were not JavaScript modules, but their own modules, which is a completely separate thing that you kind of have to understand. You can't just jump in there and get it. And like their response was like, nobody would get confused about that. I was like, first, I'm telling you I was confused about that. Secondly, like that's not what. Yeah, they would. They would be. It is very confusing. So I have problems with Angular on that front. I would say I certainly wouldn't segment it by type of application that it's good for, like necessarily that it's good for. I think maybe type of team is a better way to kind of break it up. And I mean, I really don't recommend Angular for very much. I would probably recommend Vue for almost anything that I would normally recommend Angular for, but
and why is that?
It's simpler. It's simpler. It tries to like push less of these concepts in. It doesn't like Angular. Like man, you could use it without TypeScript, but good luck. Like
right?
Their entire. I don't want to say anything I'm wrong about, but I'm pretty sure that last I looked, their entire dependency injection thing, they were trying to get it to work like C#. So it kind of depends on, the shape of the type of the object that's being injected into the constructor. But of course, the type of the object is not really something, the object types is not really something that is easily detectable in JavaScript, right? Yeah. If you have object constructors, you can, but otherwise, no, it's just a shape and you don't know about it. So like when I looked, like they had to like add in custom stuff into like the TypeScript workflow that was like emitting like custom metadata about the objects being injected in, so that's what it could use to key off of the dependency injection. It was weird. Whereas Vue doesn't try to like hammer this other paradigm in there, and it just seems simpler to me. While providing a lot of the same benefits. So the benefits that you see a lot of the time are, simple stuff where you want people to be able to type into something and have it change data in an object somewhere, just two-way binding basically, which is pretty nice when you have a more junior team, especially people that aren't trained in front-end development, They're just coming there, trying to hammer stuff out and trying to moving through a bunch of kind of forms really quickly. I think in a situation like that, that sort of thing is perfectly fine. You could still do that with React, but at that point you're like, okay, I want to bring in like Formic or something to make it easier to just generate forms where I don't have to worry about binding everything, and then you have to like learn how Formic works. And you realistically have to have at least one person on the team that really understands contexts and really takes the time to understand Formic, or else you're going to be chasing a lot of bugs. So like in those situations, totally get it. Yeah, I mean, I would say use Vue, Angular, okay. Yeah. Outside of that, like, I mean, I'm kind of it's hard to say because like you know what do you optimize for is like for the ability to deliver features quickly, especially early on, or for the ability to keep things simple so that you know, as the application evolves, you can continue iterating, keeping stuff. And I would say Angular does a much better job of keeping things simple if you know what you're doing and you have opinions on it.
Okay.
And like if you don't have someone that has opinions on it, maybe look at Vue because it will kind of guide you into the pit of success more frequently.
I see.
Yeah.
Interesting. Oh, thanks. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Cool.
So, Tony, as far as like learning React, what sort of stuff are you focusing on it with it?
So I just went and grabbed a course off Udemy and kind of went through it, and the guy did a pretty good job breaking down all the different concepts. So he's going over hooks, Redux, and some of the routing stuff that they're doing. So it's been pretty eye-opening.
Two of those things are not actually part of React, but yeah. like hooks is part of React, but like yeah, technically Redux and routing are not. That would be another library that you would pull in, but
yeah
there are standard-ish ones.
Yeah, there's dependencies and stuff like that, and just trying to get a handle on probably some of the most common dependencies. Like if you're going to work with .NET, you should probably know the JSON.NET, you know, XUnit, NUnit kind of thing. That's the other thing. A lot of they did a section over the unit testing. It was kind of, it seemed very verbose compared to how I've written for tests with .NET framework.
So for writing tests for testing React components seem verbose?
Yeah, the example they were doing was they created some navigation items, right? And when the user was authenticated, it needed to show something like 5 items in the list, and when they were unauthenticated, then they only needed to show 3, kind of thing. But it just seemed like there was a lot of boilerplate that had to be put in there. So, but it could also be that I'm just not super comfortable with it yet.
Were they using Jest?
Yes.
Jest is not kind of my tool of choice, even though it's kind of become standard. Seems, but I mean, like I still don't know about boilerplate. You know what? I have an idea. So here's probably what that was about. Is I mean I think, you know, when you're talking about testing with .NET, you're testing pure logic, basically just the code. Whereas when what they were probably doing was testing like a UI component. And when you're testing a UI component, there's just more stuff there. There's more stuff going on. Like if you were testing a WPF UI component, you would probably get a similar thing where like, okay, I want to, like, okay, if all you need to do is test that a certain amount of items are going through, I probably would just put that on a function, right? Like I would create a separate function that just had that logic on how many items would pass through it. But and then you could just test that. Like there's no boilerplate required. You just blah, describe blah, and then you write the test. But then if you're doing it at the UI component level, like think what you would have to do with like you're doing WPF, right? You would have to actually render the component somehow, and then walk the rendered tree and make sure that there were 3 items in there versus 5 items. So it would be verbose. And if you're testing the React on that level, then you're going to get a similar amount of complexity. But I mean, like also you would want to test probably other stuff too, like that the components are rendered, that if there's only 3, they render side by side. But if there's 5, they stack vertically or something like that, right? So you test more things. You have the option to test more things like that as well. But yeah, I think what you're seeing there might be more like testing UI user interfaces versus testing just pure code, like something that's not in a UI framework or system. That's my guess. Yeah.
That is something that's I think it's like I'll do everything I can so that I don't have to write tests for the UI components, right? Because I mean, if it's something like, well, I had 3 items showing, now I should only see 2. Well, I'm testing behavior and data. That should all be like non-visual things, extremely easy to write tests for, right? Because now if I can then focus on, well, the one test I should possibly write for the UI component is just to make sure, is this thing bound to the thing that I expect? As long as it's bound to it, what data is in there should be captured by another test, one that has nothing to do with the UI stuff. Because every single technology I've ever run into, it's always painful to test the UI stuff, no matter what, right? Either in React, in Angular, in WPF, whatever it is, it's always painful. So unless I really need to write something for the UI specific, I will not. I'm going to cover all the non-visual stuff and get, that covered.
Yeah. I don't know if you remember back in the day, I'm a fan of approval tests, right? So I'm not as hardcore on that. Like I'm perfectly fine with saying like, render this thing, pop it into an image, and if it looks the same as the image I have previously approved and it's stored, cool, I don't care. Whereas if it's not, then fine. And like having some logic in there, like that logic about like, all right, well, if you're logged in, you need 3. If you're logged in, you need 5 items. If you're not logged in, you need 3. Like I probably would just stick it in the component if that was all I need, and then like refactor it later if it got more complex. And in that case, yeah, you would probably test that in that level, but yeah, you kind of got to approach it with the eye of like, well, how likely is it to change? Is this one of those things that will? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What else? What else is up? By the way, thanks, Tony, for joining us into actually doing some sharing. That's exactly the kind of stuff that should we should get more people doing it. What should we be talking about? So thank you.
So yeah,
no
absolutely.
problem.
We don't want to talk the entire time. It's too much pressure.
Right. So here's
yeah.
I'd like to like throw some questions out there. I'm like assembling some content that I want to deliver, like in the shapes of like articles and talks and stuff like that. So if you guys don't mind, I'd like to run like through some questions and get your thoughts on it. So let's see, looking at the folks who are on the call, we're all developers. So, as a developer, what's most important to you? Like, what are your beliefs as a software developer?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like, what do you believe in? Because I know that asking that question, some developers would go like, "Oh, I need to make sure that I'm writing React code as opposed to Angular because Angular is not React." Or, "Oh no, it's everything about the database." Like as a software developer, what's the most important thing to you?
Communication.
Communicate. I love it.
Yeah. Um,
I love
I
that.
in it. So code is about dual communication, and I'm just going to narrow this down just to code because
Okay. Yeah.
code you have to communicate to the computer and at the same time communicate to anyone that comes along after you needs to change it. That's the whole soft part of software, the fact that it's gonna need to change at some point. So, and it's gonna be, and the single thing that you could do that would make it easiest for them to change the code. Well, okay. The first thing, the single most easiest thing you could do is happen to guess correctly how it's going to change. And then, great, it's easy. They toggle a flag. The barring that, probably the best thing you can do is make it crystal clear to someone that comes along after you what the heck you were trying to do to begin with, and then so they can evaluate that versus their own kind of view of what needs to happen, and make a decision about whether to delete your code or try to splunk into it and try to augment it or not.
So do you focus on the what you were trying to do, or do you take a step back to also make it clear why you were trying to do what you were trying to do?
I think it's a little more subtle than what and why in the way that I tend to put it. Because
Okay.
yes, what and why, but really just answering why makes it really easy to answer, to say because blah is the requirement, right? I want to for someone to looks at my code to be able to understand what my intent was in writing this particular code. So
Okay.
um, I created this particular component because I'm building a migration class, and my intent is to create a system where migrations that are generated locally by developers don't have to link to external sources. Whereas realistically, when you go ahead and deploy it in production, there might be views that actually link to an external database, which wouldn't exist for a local developer. Therefore, I created a external view helper method that will kind of abstract that toggling based on how you compile the project. Like that's the sort of stuff I want to make sure is communicated as well as possible, because then someone can come in after the fact and say, you know what, nobody's compiling this for local and deploying it to local databases, and this method is pissing me off. So the intent of it was to like support this feature that we're not even doing right now. So I'm gonna delete this. I'm gonna simplify it. I'm gonna delete all that logic. I'm gonna simplify it a bunch. That's what I want to capture. So you do have to do that, and then you have to communicate to the computer, make sure that it's bug free and doesn't do all that stuff.
Right.
And that's just a sliver of. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
No, you're good. I'm just
No,
grabbing
I
my
think.
mouse to take some notes.
Yeah. Did
Hey,
was someone
Claudia.
else? Go ahead.
Hey, Claudia, this is John.
Hey, John.
Um, so I have recently started like thinking about what he just talked about in a somewhat different manner. So I've decided that projects are about people getting their needs met.
Mm.
So sometimes it's the users or the customers. Sometimes it's the developer. It's whoever matters, some group of people who matter in your project. And everything you do in your project is to make sure that somebody's needs get met, right? So that the decision between React and Angular may be made in some cases for the benefit of the users, because one of them has features that the user need. In other cases, it may be made for the developers because, hey, we got a whole bunch of React developers and nobody knows Angular, and
I like
that's just what we need to do, right? And once I started thinking about things like that, it really changes the way I communicate in all sorts of ways in terms of how I talk to the customers, how I talk to other developers, the comments I put in my code. But that scenario that he just described, that George just described, like that was something that was done for the developers, and somehow that need just it didn't turn out to be what we thought it was going to be, something like that. And it actually becomes really important to know why, the why behind things really boils down to we did this so that somebody could get the lead. And if you don't have that context, you come in behind somebody in a project, and man, things can look nuts. So
There's a really good design tool for that I've enjoyed, I've liked, which is roles and personas. So, and that's kind of like the way that I've learned to do software design, right? Is that you start by identifying roles, which is the type of function, so the type of workflows someone's approaching a project to do, um, and then personas, which is like you write up a story about a fictitious person in that role, so that you have an actual person front of mind when you have these discussions and not just like an abstract person entity. But I've always been like a really big advocate of like saying like freaking just like include the developer as a role, right? Because I mean, you have your goals in writing the project to begin with, and it might be totally legitimate that you want to write it in React because you want to learn React and practice React. That doesn't mean that priority that has to take priority over all the other things you have to consider. But write it down rather than having it be a secret requirement that you just try to sneak in. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm completely on board with you there, and I think that the roles and personas stuff like really makes that is a good technique for making it really clear.
I like it. Do you ever use story mapping as a tool?
What mapping?
Story mapping?
No, what's story mapping?
Oh, dude. So hold on. Let me pull it up here because that's something I'm really enjoying. It goes along with roles and personas. Give me just a second. Let me pull up. I have an image here that's pretty good to use for that. Story mapping. This one maybe. Come on. What is it doing? There we go. Yes, this is the one. Just pull it over to this screen and share. Screen share. Here we go. There. Is my screen coming through yet?
Yep.
Excellent. So this is like an example of a story map that I got on the webs. But the idea at the top where you have the persona, right, the actors, and then you have the business goals, like managing orders, managing fulfillment. Those are all like business strategic things. And then you have the activities. Those would normally like map to say epics, like enter order, process fulfillment order, and all those. And then at the bottom, you have the features. Those are the actual user stories, right? What are the features that will enable those activities? And those can all be drawn from the personas, the backstory for those personas. What are they trying to accomplish? And the way you can read this is like top to bottom, left to right, right? You can actually like see sequentially what is the workflow that will enable the business to accomplish those strategic pieces of the puzzle. So this is something I've been focusing on the last year or so, and it's very helpful for the team to actually have a like, okay, what is this big picture? Where are we trying to get to, and what are the priorities for the user stories that we are working on?
This actually sounds a little bit, but not exactly like impact mapping. If you've seen that, yeah, that's it's pretty cool. It's a similar kind of charting technique. We kind of design just go down through layers, and I'm far from an expert at it. I just kind of read through it a couple times. It's promoted by Gochko Adzik, who's awesome.
Okay.
But yeah, so there's some overlap you might want to look into. And I'll stop kind of talking about it there because I don't have a great background in it at all.
Sure. Yeah, this is something I figured it came in very handy when I got with a client that had, say, a backlog with 200 items or 200 stories, right? Like, okay, where do they fit as far as the business goals and activities, right? Because just having a list of like 200 user stories, I can actually see like the workflows and the motivations. What are the customer segments? What are the value propositions that we are bringing to the table so forth? And grouping them like in this fashion, I can actually see where they fit, and I can see how they are tied together, right? Like, how do you go from one user story to the next kind of thing? So it gives a little more visibility to those relationships.
I do have a couple of criticisms of this that I think.
Okay.
First of all, that line time, that arrow time makes no sense to me because why would you limit yourself to working on fulfilling only one goal at a time?
Well, this is not
realistic. Yeah.
Yeah, don't take it as like there is only one map. It's like, think of okay, there is this one persona, there is this one, let's say a happy path. Okay, so for this persona, for this story, for this point in time, what would be the timeline? Oh, yeah, we need to enter the order info, then we have to submit the order, then we have to receive the order. So this is like one snapshot of one scenario, right? You can have multiple story maps based on the different scenarios that you're accounting for.
But then also, like, what is the like? It's time of what? It's time of someone interacting with the system, or is it time developing the system? What is the time that we're modeling that is sequential?
Like the real world time, like when it's happening in the real world, what is the sequence of steps that happen? Like in this workflow, when do things normally happen? Right? Oh yeah, there is a customer that walks up, to your desk, and now you are, taking the order from that customer. What's happening, right, from that point on?
It's happened in parallel. So
it can be happening in parallel, yes.
So I like what we're doing here. I'm not sure about this arrow time. The other kind of thing that I said, like, manage orders is not a goal. Manage fulfillment, like the word goal seems like the wrong thing there, right? It seems like maybe like a vague grouping of things,
okay.
But like you want, what your goal might be to send things out to the users, and the reason why that's a goal is because otherwise they would complain. But they would complain that you're not sending out orders. Well, okay, let's take a step back then and view it on that high level. It seems like if you go this deep, you're gonna miss things, right? So take that at what I said.
So I would describe those things you have as goals as business capabilities.
Okay.
Yeah. But also, yeah.
And so activities do, fall underneath those, right?
But like, also, like, if you're doing that to flush this out, then again, I like the word goal. I like focusing on goals. But again, like, if your goal is to fulfill user orders, well, okay, your real goal is to make customers not be pissed off at you. Which, hey, there's some daylight between those two for possible features. Like, well, like you are having issues fulfilling an order, or maybe you just deprioritize an order. Then you maybe need to ramp up communication with the customer so that they're not pissed off at you, and they're saying like, yeah, they're not getting this thing to me, but at least they're communicating a lot to me. Because how many times have you had an interaction with companies where you're like, hey, I'm annoyed that they didn't fulfill their what they said they were going to do, but I'm really annoyed that they didn't communicate to me about it. So like,
Right.
I think if you're not, yeah, that's kind of the other thing. Like, if you're not focusing on goals, you're gonna miss some things, and there's gonna be just
So
like
here's
that's
yeah, I totally follow you there, and I wouldn't see this kind of tool as a, say, a waterfall kind of requirement that's like it's written in stone, you have to follow that. It would be more like a conversation starter, right? So like you said, if I'm presented with this and I see manage orders, why is that important, right?
right.
How does that either bring or save money to the business? Let's talk about that, right? So it's more of a conversation, collaboration starter than it is like a mandate, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So cool. Yeah. So that was one question. The other question, let's see. Yeah, I got a couple more minutes. Unless anybody else wants to bring something else up. I have another question that I can run by you. Good. All right. So the other question that I've been asking people is, for you, what does being a great developer means and why? So when you think of somebody and say, "Oh yeah, that is a great developer," what makes that person a great developer to you? And it's an open question to you guys.
Do you want to answer it?
What was that?
Do you want to answer it first from your point of view?
Oh, I know. I'm throwing that out to you guys.
um, I don't know. Like the the line of like good and like I've commented on this before, that senior developer. I mean, you think junior developer has a like large skill range, like senior developer, it's massive. And it's like good developer and great developer. I mean, like if we're talking about great developer, the people that I really admire, I mean, you're realistically talking about people that are actively trying to move the industry forward, like
Mm.
people like Rich Hickey, who like made Closure and is trying, and it's like he's got these like incredibly thoughtful talks about how to keep things simple on a level of like, let's think about stuff a different way. Let's create tools that will make us like do stuff a little way. Like guys like Brett Victor. I remember I shared like the programming tribes thing. I mean, I fall pretty clearly in the one in the no, it's all about the academics and like the viewing it as logic and expressions of intent tribe. But I mean, I that's the sort of stuff that to me is like, whoa, that's a great developer in that they're not only able to create something new, but they're able to step out of things, think about stuff differently, and create a whole new process. Right? That what to me is like really really great.
Okay.
No, you don't realistically have any of those working at your company, but maybe you do. But like, it's not a super common thing that you've got people of that caliber walking around.
Right.
But I mean, like that to me is like, the Rich Hickey, the Alan Kays, the Brett Victors, like that's the highest level to me, right there. I mean, even John Carmack, who's more like working in the nuts and bolts. He's very much in like the the details and understand machine guy. But I mean, like, how much stuff has he done, which has enabled, huge chunks of the video game industry, or like because like he's figured stuff out about how to think about 3D rendering. Right.
Okay. So there you really spoke to another question that I had like down the road, which is like, who are your role models and why? So I think you just described those like your role models, like the greatest developers. So
Right.
let's try to like trim it down to like great developers are people who you would hire and you would be happy like working with them, producing something. What would that look like?
I would say that a good developer is somebody who gets stuff done, right? They don't get roadblocked, all that, don't get blocked on too many issues. They also don't have much of an ego, meaning that they're approachable. They can talk to junior devs, and it's really about helping other people get better as well. If you're just kind of closed off, I think that's counterproductive. Uh,
I like that.
yeah, that's a couple things.
I think there's multiple categories of that too. I mean, and even those two things aren't exactly the same thing. And if you're talking about, okay, I want to build a great team, you kind of need some from all columns. Like, so even that type of person that's like, they're not great at they're not going to mentor out. They're not super great communicators. I mean, there's a level you have to meet. But like, I mean, there's guys I'm thinking of that I've worked with and are like, no, this person. I don't mean to say guys. I'm trying to be like gender neutral. I'm just thinking of a specific person where I'm like, where this person was, can be very brash and not very brusque, like you're not realistically gonna sit down and have like a long chat with him, but when he was the guy that you could throw at a client project, and like he wouldn't even produce that pretty code, but like any language, any task, he would get that done, and it would work well enough. For the needs. And like then you'd sit down and be like, man, he should not have wired up Docker this way. This is going to be a pain in the ass later on, but it does work right now, and I guess it is a good starting point. So, like, very much mission accomplished there. But I don't think that that's like another level. I think that that's just kind of a role you could fill in a team. That's a really important role. I think someone who can mentor is another role. I think someone who can provide leadership and can think on as a high design level is a really important role at all. Like I said, it's all about communication. I said code is like a sliver of that. That communicating with your team, across the team, being able to organize all the stuff, being able to generate a community and keep this community flowing where all these people who kind of fill different roles can interact and trust each other. That's super duper important. And it's
I totally like that.
Yeah.
Totally on board with that. And I mean, thinking with the almost like seeing a distinction between like, from good to great. Like I'd see a developer who gets the thing done no matter what as maybe a good developer. If that person just like, okay, I'll do the nastiest thing possible just to get it done, period. That would be good. Great would be the person who would put in the constraints and say, okay, this is implementation I was able to do given the knowledge that I currently have, the requirements that I was given, and the time that I had available. But I do know it's not the best implementation because of this, that, or the other. And then turn that like in a nice box item so that a product owner can realize and say, okay, I see that as a technical debt, and you're explaining to me why that is and giving me options so that as a product owner, I can look at that and say, oh, okay, so if we go with that option A to make it better, right? It's like, oh, okay, that to me would be a good distinction between a good and a great developer.
Yeah.
Right?
But it's still within that like one narrow band, right? That within that band of like person can get you done. Whereas like, I mean, like I'll say like I'm not always great at getting shit done. So like when I like to sit down and like understand the architecture and like really flesh it out, and then once it's all kind of in place, it does tend to go a lot faster. But I'm not gonna, not even the architecture, like understand the technology. Like it's a ramp up for me most of the time because I'm sitting there reading documentation and building little experiments and playing with that. And I mean, like, that makes me a terrible person for the task of like, this client has this Android app that's malfunctioning, and we just need to get it done. And you know, don't put me on there. But it's not just because I haven't coded Android. Put the person that can buzzsaw through problems, even if they haven't touched Android on there. I don't think we're really on the same scale here. They're different aspects. And I mean, I'm trying to work on like being able to like flip my mind into working in that get it done mode, but it's hard. And I don't know very many people that can work in multiple modes like that.
Right. Yeah. That's good stuff.
Yeah. But also communication still ends up being the common denominator, doesn't it? Because either way, whatever your deficiencies are in your approach, and you have to be able to communicate them clearly and in a way that people can make decisions based on that. And oh boy, can that be tough.
Yeah. Absolutely, because you know, like we all say, we spend way more time changing code or reading code and changing code than we do writing new code. Mm-hmm. So if the code and the person does not communicate well, like, well, you're a host, like 2-3 sprints later, you have to come back and do something here, and it's going to take way longer just because we cannot figure out what's going on there. So yeah, communication is a big thing.
You know what? I wonder about that because you know that's kind of been the phrase for us, for me, since the very beginning, right? Spend more time changing code, reading. Realistically, like I would say most of the projects I've worked on have been greenfield projects, and
I'm sorry, have what?
Have been greenfield projects. And have been projects where I'm building something, I'm working on stuff, and of course other people are coming along and working on it later. But I mean, oftentimes they're not at my company; they're with someone else, or I don't have any contact with them. I do worry about that. That like, you know, is there an aspect of this? Like, is there a whole underclass of other developers that are just pissed the hell off by all the stuff I've been doing? And I don't know, I try to be mindful about it, but like, I don't have any feedback of that sort, really. Like, so I it's not possible for me to like get everything and like really optimize to it. I don't know. Do you find yourself in a similar situation? Something?
You know what? The way I see it is, you know, today's greenfield development is next week's legacy system, right? Because even if you're on a greenfield thing and you're creating stuff, you know, 2 sprints, 3 sprints down, you're going to come back and change things there, because in agile world, you're going to push that, deploy that into production, you're going to gather feedback, and then the users will say, well, you know, now that we see that the system can do this, can it also do this other thing? So you're very likely to going back and changing what's there. I don't know if I got sidetracked. I'm sorry. I don't know if I got sidetracked.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, you do know the application. You do know all that design that you did and all the, you know, you have a lot more context than someone else coming out after you might. And that's what makes me nervous, especially because, like, you know, I'm in consulting. I don't get to see the developers maintaining stuff. I don't know who they are. I don't really talk to them very often. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I've been very fortunate that with the approach that I've been taking to like working with the product owners to make sure that we have clearly defined user stories, the user stories that define why we are building this thing to begin with, uh, having acceptance criteria that clearly outlines the scenarios for which we are implementing the features for, trying to do my best to have the test written resembling the user story and acceptance criteria, and then having that bleed into the code where the code reads based off of the requirements that we are working on. So having all those things and following those practices, I've been getting a lot of great feedback from people saying, well, yeah, it's very easy. The way you are doing things, it's very easy for anybody else to pick it up. And it doesn't
nice.
have to be like senior developers, juniors can come in and say, oh, yeah, I can actually follow along what's happening, because there are links back to the user stories. There are comments that describe why you've made those decisions. Like even in things where like, maybe I'm writing this thing here in React that I'm not 100% comfortable with. So I drop notes to say, I am pretty sure there's got to be a way to make it better. I just do not know how right now at the time of this writing. So dropping those things along, people say, yeah, it's actually pretty easy to pick up where you've left off. I go, all right, I guess I'm doing it right then.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah.
Very cool, very cool. Yeah, thanks guys for playing along with those. Those are some of the questions that I've been asking, just to learn more from people, because it's all about how we interact with others, right? This is something I've been bringing up quite often, which is, back at least when I started writing software, I'm coming from a time when people or the businesses would just, handle a bunch of requirements to developers, lock them in a room, slide pizza under the door, and say, I'll be back in a, like 12-month periods. And there was not a whole lot of communication between the developers and the businesses, not a lot of questioning as to why are we building, what are we trying to achieve here to make sure that we can actually produce the better software for that. There wasn't a lot of that. And I still see organizations that work like that. I'm like, guys, this is why there's a lot of like going back and forth. That's why, projects take like 2-3 times as long. It's because we don't have this clear communication from the get-go.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
yeah, and hearing you guys like bringing up communication, it's like, yes, that we're all in sync here. I like that.
We should talk about communication techniques next time.
Let's do that. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Put that, and yeah, let's absolutely talk about it. Like, what are the communication techniques? Through spoken language, through code, through like hand signals, whatever. So yeah, let's make a topic for next week then.
Yeah, and I do want to just jump back kind of 2 topics ago and kind of bridge that a little bit.
Sure.
I think that's why what you just said is why I consider those people like Rich Hickey, Alan Kay, Red Victor, and so those people like really, really good developers, because I know for a fact, because I've worked with it, that the things that they created are really useful and really powerful and very flexible, and I get it, and I get what they were intending to do, and how to work with it. You know, I will say, like, guys like Linus Torvalds, I'm not so sure he gets shit done, but I have no clue what the heck he was going for sometimes, and I just don't get it.
Yeah. Same here.
I mean, like,
I'm not the
he's
only
got
one.
he's got these great ideas that are usually about file systems, and then like other people come and put a ton of work on top of it, and eventually like something you can kind of wrap your head around falls out. But yeah, I'm like that. I almost wouldn't put him in that category, even though clearly he's a great and prominent industry figure.
Right. Yeah, I can only relate to that, and I always bring that up. I mean, you got me hooked into Mercurial in the day,
Yeah.
and love it. And then when I had to switch to Git, and I'm looking for like the equivalent commands, and I'm like, what? Are you freaking kidding me? How does that make sense to a
Right.
normal person? I'm not a nerdy type of developer. I'm a normal person. Have that make sense to me? It doesn't.
Yep. All right. I do have to go. I've got my next meeting starting. Yeah. Good
Well,
talk.
yeah.
We'll talk.
that was a great conversation.
Bye bye.
All right. Bye, guys. See you next time.